So welcome to this podcast. In this podcast, I'm going to talk about Saturn's placement in the 6th house or in Virgo. And I'm going to start the podcast by talking about the condition of the 6th house via talking about what Virgo is supposed to be, because in the natural chart, Virgo would sit on the cusp of your 6th house. Now, I've talked about this a lot, but I'm going to do a recap. Virgo is a translator. It's a preparatory stage for Libra. Why? Because from the 4th house cusp, or in the sign of Cancer, there is a transition. And the transition is that Cancer becomes Leo. And what happens in the sign of Cancer is that your convictions are set. Your convictions are not based on your belief systems, because your belief systems haven't formed yet. You're still a very young person. You're still an infant or a very young child. And you begin to internalize your environment in ways that lead to these types of conviction. So your 4th house is the condition of the environment that you have absorbed. And from that environment, you have extracted a sense of self that really is a sense of self-acceptance. So it is the deep, unconditional image that you form of yourself, deep in that place where you begin to manifest realities, because convictions create realities. Whatever transaction happens there, it is symbolized in physical experience by the essence of mother, or the essence of safety, or the essence of foundation, or the essence of familiarity. But whatever the process that happens in there, it has to birth an ego. That ego, that primary storyteller, is Leo. And once Leo emerges, the one thing that characterizes it is that it has the ability to begin to tell its own stories. Prior to that, all its stories were told by its environment in an unconditional way. Leo is the one that comes out and says, now I'm going to start experimenting with my own stories. And Leo creates a lot of stories. All of these stories form the basis for what you call ambition. What do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a policeman. Oh, I want to be a pilot. These are all the stirrings of Leo as the young human begins to experiment with the ability to tell its own stories. And it will do so for life. The essence of Leo is that it feels like the primary conductor, the orchestrator, the one who is really behind, or the self, the nature of the self. But it's not real, really, you know? It's the way that your mind is built, the astrological natal chart and the signs and everything. They are just talking about the way that human psychology is built, because it has a very definite structure. It's a structure that is deeply mathematical. And if you've been following my work, if you're following the 5 principles of organized complexity, both the formal and informal publications, you begin to get a hint of all of this. Now, Leo's ambition has one destination, and that is Aquarius. Because whereby Leo is the individualized ego, Aquarius is that individualized ego now within the context of a social environment of egos, professional egos. And what Leo is really looking for is to sit in that environment surrounded by those that adore it. Not just any type of people, but competent people like it. They now celebrate it and adore it. But you can't get to Aquarius without passing through Capricorn. So Leo aims for Capricorn. That is where it targets, because it is within Capricorn, or the 10th house, that Leo will demonstrate the significance that it believes it has about itself. That's why it tells stories in the first place. And these stories that Leo tells, they are really experimental in some sense. And within all these experimental narratives, Leo is trying to catch a glimpse of what it really is. Its own self-significance, its own self-importance, its own role in life, its destiny in some sense. Now, the idea is that by generating a lot of ambitious stories, at least one of those stories becomes successful enough to sit in the 10th house in Capricorn, because the 10th house is the house of social acceptance, and the sign of Cancer is the house of self-acceptance. So the journey really is from self-acceptance to social acceptance, represented by the aspirational interval indicated by the relationship between mother and father. I mean, it's very deep, but this is just the topical nature of it all. Now, the reason why we have to do this background discussion before we get to Virgo is because without this background discussion, then you don't really understand what needs to happen in Virgo. You see, because Virgo is it's the airport before you fly out of the country. It's the train station before you leave for your destination. And what you're doing is that you are going to enter into the reality system that you share with other people, strangers. Prior to that, you have never done that before. Prior to that, all the realities that you have experienced, they revolve around familiarities. environments that you were born in, locations that you were born in. In Virgo, you begin to prepare to enter the world of Libra. And in Libra, you're going to come across strangers. And Libra allows for almost anything in some sense. It's a screen, a projection screen. And on that screen, you project your convictions. It is in Libra that you begin to see the manifestation of your convictions. And so that means that since convictions are seated in the 4th house or in the sign of Cancer, then Leo and Virgo are translators of conviction. Virgo is where the actual conviction becomes translated into physical reality in some sense. It's why I call it a translator. Why? Because in Virgo, you create plans. Those ambitions that stir up in Leo, it's in Virgo that you determine whether they're going to have any merit or not. It's only those plans that have merit that will carry forward into the realities that you will share with other people. So Virgo is a preparatory stage. And in that stage, you are looking for awareness of competence, awareness of functionality. The idea is to be able to develop certain functional items. For instance, in Virgo, you're going to develop a square peg. In Libra, you're trying to plug that square peg of yours into a square hole. That's what relationship it is. But all relationship strategies are carriers of ambition. Networking, because you want to go somewhere. All right. And the way that it happens is that everybody pretends like they just want to get to meet people because, it's fun to meet people. No, everybody wants something. So in Virgo, you develop the plan. Sometimes it is done unconsciously, but when Saturn is in Virgo, it can no longer be unconscious. Why? Because the unconscious process won't work. Wherever Saturn is, you need to become more aware in that area, and you need to become more aware of the physical reality. The need for social acceptance. And social acceptance is held by the mainstream. And the mainstream is like a club, and you ain't in it. You need to get access into it. So how are you going to do that? It's a negotiation of some kind, or you might just slam down the whole door if you can. You see, there's no real hard and fast rules how you get into the mainstream. The most important thing is that you get into the mainstream. And getting into the mainstream is the nature of power, like political power, social power, influential power. All right. Now, in Virgo, you begin to create concrete plans about the real world. And you don't really have any experience about the real world yet. So it's more like an experimental phase. The ambitions of Leo, carried by the intensity of the ego and the fixicity of the ego, must now be attenuated unconsciously into tangibility, functional tangibility. So in Virgo, you must develop tradable skills. You must develop things that you can exchange in relationships with others. So the problem often arises when you develop a square peg and then you get into Libra and you're looking for a round hole to plug it in because you're not aware that you have developed a square peg. So you keep trying to force a square peg into a round hole or a round peg into a square hole. And the result is a mess eventually. But the idea of these things is that they always serve as learning strategies. Why? Because you need to catch the error before you get into Scorpio. If you take the mismatch into Scorpio, then it will deliver to you a life-transforming event that will nudge you back into your reality of where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to understand, or it will destroy you. So in order to prepare to make sure that you don't encounter those types of things, you need to become very aware of what it is that is going on in your reality before you get into Scorpio. Because if things fail in Scorpio, then how are you going to get to Capricorn? And how are you going to get to Aquarius? So at best, what you're looking for is that if you make a mistake, you can encounter the type of transformatory events or the type of catharsis that can restore you back to your pathway with more wisdom now. Because you must still make the journey through Scorpio in order to get to Sagittarius and then Capricorn. So Saturn in Virgo is that type of narrative that wants to make you aware of that stage of the journey of ambition. It wants to make you aware that this Virgo is so important. Why? So that everything ahead of you can be good. And so it will draw your attention to the Virgoan archetype or all the dramatizations concerned with the 6th house. It will draw your attention to that. And it will do so by making you fail in those areas. And every time you fail, you'll be forced to revisit the reason why you have failed. Now, what is Saturn? You see, Saturn is an aspect of your mind. And this aspect of your mind is beyond your conscious will. It is the part of your mind that is connected with something much, much higher than yourself. And as a result of that, it holds you responsible. It holds you accountable by referencing what you believe that you are right now with what you know that you can be. And that gap now becomes the nature of your conscience and the nature of your guilt or the nature of your shame. And it is in this way that Saturn is able to limit your experience by forcing you to be fearful of yourself. This can often manifest as being fearful of the realities that you are in. But the general trend is that you are limiting yourself because you are afraid. And oftentimes the fear is encoded as the fear of failure, or the fear of guilt, or the fear of being found out, or the fear of whatever. Now, the way that Virgo copes with this is that Virgo seems to throw itself into even more overdrive, in the sense that Virgo is about making detailed plans. It's about understanding the structure of things, because in that area you are unconsciously trying to build several pathways into the realities that you will share with other people. Now, these pathways, by their very nature, they are proliferating. Why? Because it's like a game of numbers in some sense. All the mutables, they tend to represent such strategies. Like Virgo, like Sagittarius, like Pisces, like you're searching for something. You are preparing for something in some sense. Alright? And in Virgo, you are preparing to enter Libra. Now in Libra, you're going to meet so many different types of people. And you're going to have to make choices. The mutables are where you actually prepare to make the choices. That's really what it is. Now, in signs like Libra, the cardinal signs, you basically begin the process with these choices that you have made. And then the outcomes will show up in the fixed signs. Okay? So, because wherever you find Saturn means that that area represents a tremendous area of success for you. But you must match it with the effort. You must do the work. And understanding the work that is to be done in Virgo or in the 6th house, that's why I'm making this podcast. You see, because where Saturn appears, especially in the 6th house or in Virgo, it fills the person with a tremendous amount of self-doubt. And the self-doubt often manifests as compensation, in the sense that the person becomes hypercritical of themselves and of others. They become chronic warriors. Okay? Because the fear of failure exists in the fear of failing in relationships, running into the wrong relationships, or not being able to access the right realities that allow the expression of ambition or the continued development of ambition. And people have a lot of ways of dealing. Some just throw themselves into excess work. They want to drain that fear by trying to cover all the possible pathways. That's what I mean by the proliferation of pathways. Okay? And there's no human being who is really capable of doing that. You're going to burn yourself out and you're going to exhaust yourself. Because what is really being called for is the accentuation or the development of a very particular type of knowing. You're being called to understand people and the motives of people. And since you don't have access to the realities that you share with others in order to understand these motives, it means that you need to find the motives within yourself. Why? Because the translation from Virgo or the 6th house into Libra or the 7th house is like a mirror in some sense. The descendant is reflective. As above, so below. What you're seeing in others or what you're looking for in others, they're just a reflection of what you find in yourself. Because there's really no difference between the internal and the external, you see. The internal is the external. The relationship between the two is the awareness of God. So your reality is not different from you. The difficulty is to be able to understand the relationship between these things. What do you mean when you say that your external reality is the same as the internal reality? Do you mean that a person has chosen to suffer? And the answer is yes. The question is, where is that choice being made? It is not being made in your conscious will. So there's really nothing you can do about it. And Saturnian processes are outside of your conscious will. That's why it's able to hold you responsible. That's why for the human being to cope, they have to go into denial. And so with Saturn and Virgo on the 6th house, the individual begins to condition themselves to expect failure. So they become very somber. They become very pessimistic. They tend to want to dampen whatever expectations they may have in the realities of others. But the reality is that they are dampening their own expectations. Why? Because they are afraid of failing. An interesting thing about this fear is that because the fear is often denied, the individual goes into denial and constructs an entire worldview, a way of everyday life that hides this fear. And so the individual throws themselves into routines that the expected precision and the expected whatever around these routines, they're ridiculous. The expectation levels are so high, the person is a constant critic. But the interesting thing is that criticism of the external reality is something that they may see. But that's not what's really going on. They're tearing themselves inwardly also with those same types of criticisms. That's really what it is. And so they don't receive criticisms well from others at all. Not because they don't know what these criticisms are, but they're always telling themselves those criticisms always. So they're self-judging because they're self-reflecting. Why? Because the descendant is a mirror. The upside is that because of this rigmaroling in one place, because remember, Virgo is a translation that begins the stages towards the development of what? Ambition, the development and the achievement of ambition. Well, if Saturn is in Virgo, that journey doesn't really go anywhere. And it stops short before you even get into the reality of other people. So you don't even get to test out the plans. Now, it's not that these people don't meet people. They do. But things don't work out. Why? Because the fear is the thing that is limiting everything. The upside of this is that these people, they are able to develop a mind that is so methodical, so analytical. They are what I call a methodician in some sense, meaning they become masters of process. All right. You need to see their shopping list. You need to see the way that they plan their days. There's almost no room for error. The person is like a neurotic once they begin to encounter chaos. And the interesting thing is that chaos is what they really need. Why? Because there's structure in it. That's what they're called to understand, because you can see that Saturn in the 6th house in Virgo really is a fear of that chaos. The chaos that is found in the reality systems that every human being gets to deal with. When we say that a person becomes good with other people, what does it really mean? It means that they can navigate realities wherein which you find and encounter different types of people. Some people cannot. All right? One thing I have noticed by looking at so many natal charts is that when you have Saturn in Virgo or Saturn in the 6th house, there's usually something else. Why? Because there is a type of discipline you're supposed to develop with Saturn in Virgo, but it's the discipline that allows you to deal with these complex structures and complex systems. The person is afraid of that because they cannot understand in an analytical way how to deal with that, because it's not their fault. Modern science today doesn't know how to deal with that. The work we're doing at the 5 principles of organized complexity is bridging that gap, providing analytical tools and techniques that allow science to understand complex systems, including the human mind. Okay? So these people, they are afraid of that. And as a result of that, they pretend to want to engage with these realities by becoming very analytical. But what they're doing is that the analytical processes that they develop, they are used to restrain them from actually entering into that reality. And that's where the criticism comes in. The criticisms come in to prevent the person from really engaging in that. Why? Because they don't want to have to find out that they're not very good with people. They know how it's supposed to work. They know which strategies they can advise other people, but they can't go into it and be successful because they don't know how to deal with chaos. And oftentimes when you find these types of placements in the natal chart, you find generators of chaos everywhere, especially in the placement of Mars. There is a counterbalancing spontaneity that is out of control in their lives. It is designed to introduce chaos. The idea is that now becomes the raw material that they now learn to tame, because they must learn to tame it in themselves. Because by learning to do so, it will provide the pathways with which they're able to navigate the realities of others. Why? Because Saturn in Virgo is a very ambitious person. Why else will Saturn be sitting in Virgo? Often there's a tremendous amount of ambition that is looking for realization, and then the blockage comes and sits right at the door so that the ambition itself cannot translate into a reality. And it is extremely painful and frustrating. But that's the job. The work is to be able to tame that chaos. And so the end stage of this type of placement is that you find a person who becomes very good with dealing with other people, not just in the theater itself where you find Libra. But prior to it, to be able to know what to look for, you are looking at a master tactician. Someone who could know, in worst case scenarios, they could become an extremely gifted manipulator of people. Why? Because they know exactly which buttons to press. They can treat people like pieces of a puzzle and arrange them together to achieve what it is that they want. That's the highest expression of this Saturn in Virgo. All right? But you see, people are not just computers, or people are not pieces of puzzle. They are more complex. Meaning that there's more potential for chaos in some sense. And that's where these people eventually learn to shine. Once they can understand that this chaos itself is not actually in an external reality. It is within them. And you'll find this in many of the natal charts where you have Saturn in the 6th house or Saturn in Virgo. The natal chart is just begging for organization. But what type of organization? In order to be able to control a complex system, you need simplicity. And finding the simplicity in your life is why you have Saturn in the 6th house or Saturn in Virgo.